Well, hey there, welcome back. This is just a continuation of part 1 of talking about coercion and isolation with none other than Linz. And so we're really excited for you guys to listen and or watch the second half of this conversation. And we hope that you feel the same level of passion and energy that we had in sharing this stuff. So thanks for hanging out for part 2. Yeah, I think that's so important that we continue to stress, like what you just said there, Linz. It immediately reminded me of an article I read that was a snapshot of a podcast that the quarterback of the Miami Dolphins was on. So Tua Tagovailoa, he's a fantastic quarterback, and he has basically been shining ever since the new coach of the Miami Dolphins was there, and he did not hold anything back when talking about his previous coaching experience. So this was like a direct quote of what he said. If you woke up every morning and I told you you suck at what you did, that you don't belong doing what you do, that you shouldn't be here, that guy should be here, that you haven't earned this right, you have a terrible person telling you things you don't want to hear or that you probably shouldn't be hearing, you're going to start believing that about yourself. He really struggled his first couple of years because he had a coach that used these tactics to somehow improve his performance. And it only took less than a year before, Miami changed their coaching staff and actually just had someone who believed in him and told him that he's supportive and that, he thought the world of him and that he knew how much potential he has, and he just supported him in every way possible. And he was one of the most dominant quarterbacks in the league last year. But that's just status quo. That shit happens all the time. I'm just really excited to hear athletes publicizing that stuff now and being like, this is what it was like for me. Because if the players aren't going to say anything, who was supposed to know what's going on? Because those are very closed doors.
Well, it's funny that you say that. There's been referees in the past that have been did you know that ex-coach was like this? Or, oh, they're like this towards refs. Do you think they're also like this to their players? And it's kind of do you think that their personality or their behavior changes that much between the refs and their players?
No.
It's just an interesting question coming from somebody who's an outside perspective in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that speaks to
what
you just
that's
read
interesting because
there.
Lenz has done a really good job of connecting us with referees, specifically basketball referees in Alberta, and trying to support them, because that's a whole other conversation. But you talk about someone who always gets the shit end of the deal. It's referees always being the scapegoat to a coach's frustrations. But yeah, love those guys. Keep reffing, please. We need you. Otherwise, sport doesn't exist.
Yeah, every time I go to a game, I'm when I hear people in the crowd yelling at them, I'm stop. Now I see both sides.
Yeah.
Okay, the next one is denial of attention and support. So ignoring players or excluding them from events, which goes back to the isolation piece that we were talking about. So my coach isolates individual athletes by making them sit out of practices or games. 70%.
70%.
My coach uses silence or ignores players as a way to express dissatisfaction with athletes.
How many memories did you just have flood in your mind with that?
A lot, and 80%.
80%. Mm-hmm. There is I always use this in hockey as an example with coaches. I just simply show them body language, and the body language is me standing up, putting my hands either in my pocket or behind my back, and leaning against the wall on the bench. And I just look at the coach and I go what am I telling the players right now? Oh, that I'm totally checked out, that I have no hope in you, and that this game is over.
Mm-hmm.
Instantly. As soon as that happens, game's over.
Yeah.
Players can't bounce back from that.
No. Yeah. It's just, or the injuries. I've had a lot of athletes share that they got injured and their coach barely even checked on them, which might be partly also related to what you said of this player's injured, so I don't even need to worry about getting them in the lineup.
Yeah.
Or this player is injured and they're not in the starting five, so talk to you in 3 months when you're healed.
Yeah, silence is a really common thing. It's when the coach is upset at the team for how they're playing, if anger didn't work, then they'll just get real quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Good strategy. If the left side of the scale didn't work, let's go to the far right of the scale. Like that'll work.
Well, and for some people, it's almost scarier when they're silent
Yeah.
than when they're angry.
Good point.
Yeah.
But again, all that's happening as a coach is that you were dysregulated. And so you used anger and hostility and name calling and a whole bunch of awful shit. And oh, surprise, surprise, that wasn't working.
Mm-hmm.
So then the coach gets frustrated that like their brilliant idea that they thought was for sure going to work didn't work. So then they shut down because they're tired of feeling let down by the expectation or the anticipation of success, and then their team continuing to play poorly. So then, well, I don't give a shit.
Mm-hmm.
Off switch, no emotional presence whatsoever, and they're not engaged with the players. The feeling of that is literally like icy cold on the bench.
Mm-hmm.
You feel it as soon as the coach downshifts into that not care mode. It's just like a cool breeze just goes through the entire court.
Yeah. It's interesting too of like some players can take this sort of stuff, which isn't an excuse for it to happen, but like it's like when coaches, how you explain that when coaches yell and then like 3 times it's effective. When you have like 1 or 2 players that respond well to that behavior, it's like, well, everybody should then. Or then they become favorites or whatever it is because, well, they respond to what I'm doing and what I'm doing is right.
Yeah.
So.
And even that example, your language was actually really critical there. You said some players can respond. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that for that player, that is the best strategy to use to get that player motivated.
Mm-hmm.
They just happen to be resilient enough or gritty enough that they can filter through your nonsense and be like, okay, I know what coach is trying to do here. But then for your players who have more sensitive nervous systems, which having a more sensitive nervous system does not mean that that person is less gritty or less capable. Mm-hmm. They're a different kind of human. That strategy will shut their nervous system down and then they're gone. Mm-hmm. So that strategy is never the best strategy, period.
Yeah. I'm glad how you just explained that, because if you are listening and heard that and thought or took away, this player doesn't get impacted by this behavior, they have more grit or they're more resilient. No, they are not necessarily more resilient than the other person. It's what you said, Matt, of like their body just responds different or their mind responds different or they process things differently or whatever it is. It does not mean that person X is resilient and the other person is not.
Yeah.
But that's what it comes across as, like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you really see more of those sensitive players that they don't fit the stereotypical model of being like a strong, like elite, mentally tough athlete. Those players really struggle to continue to thrive through sport because honestly, like coaches just kind of destroy the experience for them. Mm-hmm. Unless they're like a God-given generational talent where coaches always praised that highly sensitive person. Most of those athletes don't really make it all the way because it's way too cutthroat and hostile.
Yeah. Yeah. This is so good. The next ones were behaviors that are not super well studied, but they were like, let's still ask these questions and see. So it was the coach states that they do not have an open door policy for athletes and refuse to interact with players outside of designated practice times or games. And so the question was just simply, my coach has an open door policy. This one, the numbers are better. It's like 75, 80%.
Yeah.
The coaches had an open door policy.
Yeah.
Still, could be more.
Is there a follow-up question to like, even though there's an open door policy, does the coach actually listen to what you say as an athlete?
There should be.
Because I know lots of coaches, send in an amendment. Can you please add this additional question next time? Yeah, there's tons of coaches that have an open door and a closed mind.
Uh-huh.
Tons.
Or I'm here for you and I care about your mental health. So every time that something happens, like, please come tell me. Yeah. While Joe on the sidelines has been struggling for 7 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that someone on your team's not doing well. It shouldn't only be the player's responsibility to address the fact that there's been a change and what's going on. Be curious.
I'm not going to name drop the coach, but I love how they actively approach their players for check-ins. They don't say, I have an open door policy. They'll approach their player for check-ins and say, like, how you doing?
Yeah.
Like, mental health, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I love that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of players are probably going to be nervous to ever talk to you about it.
Goodness. We're actually going to be talking at length about this, me and Shauna, and next week's episode about that type of communication and the power differential and the fear of like even talking to your boss or your coach. Like, I don't care who you are, even if you're best friends with the boss, when all of a sudden you're having that kind of conversation, it's scary. So as a coach, you have to know that 90% of the time, players are intimidated by you when you're having more of a one-on-one conversation. The fact that they even walked into your dressing room to talk to you was a huge, courageous act for them. So you need to be very mindful of, not that you're responsible for their feelings, but like just kind of acknowledging like how difficult that is for a player to even be in that position in the first place.
Yeah. And if you have created an environment where players do come to you, even though they're maybe scared to have the conversation, they at least felt like they could go to you.
Yeah.
Good for you. Good for you.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. The next one was, my coach only cares about my accomplishments and accolades.
Yeah.
50%.
Okay. What have you done for me lately? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a coach tell certain players that their only role on the team was to be a GPA booster. Oh my God.
Are there some teams in NCAA where or some schools where the team GPA has to be above a certain threshold?
It sounds like it.
I didn't know that.
Because these girls never played or saw the field because the coaches only wanted them to boost the team's GPA. Here, it's not team, it's individual. Like you have a certain GPA in order to stay on the team.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's got riddled with holes.
Yeah, that would cause some other issues for sure.
Weird.
My coach sets unrealistic expectations for performance.
Yeah.
60%.
Yeah, and honestly, that one's so easy to fix. It's just like talk to your players. Be on the same page.
Sorry, I laughed at the quote.
What's the quote?
My coach would consistently boast how her athletes push themselves so hard in workouts that they would vomit.
Oh.
She said it's a good thing for us to be vomiting. We're already working out 2 to 4 times a day to keep up with these expectations. Did you ever have a garbage bin placed in the middle of the gym?
Oh, yeah.
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 Which is so wild. But again, one of those things that like, when you're younger, you're like, yeah, your coach puts out there too. Did you throw up today?
Yeah,
Sick.
yeah.
Yeah, I pushed myself. I never did. I'm going to brag about that.
Wow.
Never puked.
That's impressive.
I was close once. I was a puker.
There's
Were you?
no chance.
You're a hamstring puller and
I'm a very sensitive ginger. Yes, it's well documented here at the office.
Goodness gracious, too good. Okay, this one's gonna upset me. My coach constantly made comments about athletes' weights and body figures. It's not as high. It's about 40%.
Okay.
But still.
That's 40%. Like, that's not a small number.
At the age of 10, she told us to have food logs to show her because a moment on the lips is a lifetime on the hips.
That's great. That's great.
Oh, God.
That's really supportive, helpful one-liner
nice.
there. That is actually something that we hear all the time at Mind Buffs. Like, that's one of the most common things that we hear. And sometimes it's not that our client, the athlete themselves, were told something like that, or their body was specifically commented on, but even seeing like a teammate's body commented on puts the fear of God in them, that like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to be that person who just got humiliated publicly by coach about like her body. So then everyone becomes afraid just from one comment on body. If you know you need to have a conversation with your athlete about their physique, their physical shape, especially like in football, there's so many position players. So if you're like, if you want to continue to have success at this position, this is the ideal body type that will allow you to kind of continue to progress through your sport. Those conversations always happen one-on-one, and they're not about look. They're about like, we know that your body can perform better if it is in this type of state. Have you talked to your nutritionist? Like, and yada, yada, yada. That's a very sensitive conversation. It always has to happen one-on-one.
And that's the key point. Did you talk to your nutritionist? Because back to what we said at the start, your football season will end and your coach says you need to gain 30 pounds over the summer.
Cool.
If you're 18 years old, you're just going to go and like drink and eat fast food all summer to gain weight.
Yeah.
If you don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you need to be like, that's a lot of weight to gain over a summer. You need to have somebody who's an expert or a professional to teach you how to do it in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Plus, if you're just doing it by eating McDonald's every single day, you're not going to, you might gain the weight, but you're not going to feel very good, right?
Oh, God, you're going to hate yourself. It's
Yeah.
so bad.
With that said, though, eat McDonald's when you want to eat McDonald's, but like, you know what I'm saying.
Just not every day for 3 months straight.
Yes, exactly. Okay, the next one was my coach is concerned about the well-being of their players. We've kind of already talked about this one. And this one was 80%.
Yeah, but
Not as high as I want it to be.
You had shared, though, that you had experienced coaches that say that.
Yes.
Right? But like, are there actually actions
Correct.
that support that?
Correct.
I don't think that number would be nearly as high.
That's a good point. Another amendment coming your way.
Yeah.
Just kidding. My coach does not care about my personal needs or my personal growth as an individual. 50%.
Yeah. And that one, it's funny. I will just share my intuitive response. I actually felt bad for the coaches when I heard that, because I know as a former coach, it's impossible to spend as much time as you want to with all of your players, especially if you coach a sport where there are a lot of human beings on it. Right? Like, maybe with like a volleyball size team, like, around like 10 players, like you'd be able to spend enough time with them throughout the season. But maybe you have a 2 or 3 month season. That's not a very long time. Like, do you have enough time? So I always feel bad for coaches because I know they want to spend more time with their athletes, but just logistically, often it's just not possible.
Yeah.
That's why it's amazing if one of your assistant coaches is that player's coach and their main responsibility is doing one-on-ones with players throughout the year, and at least that they can pass on pertinent information to you as the head coach that you can use for good reasons. But I feel for coaches that there's not a lot of time for that.
I do love hearing when teams have, like you said, that assistant coach that kind of is the player coordinator.
Yeah.
Like player relations coach
Yeah.
per se. Yes. Okay, let's keep going. My coach has singled out an individual or group of individuals and blames, belittles, or degrades this individual like constantly. 55%.
Yeah. Scapegoat. I've seen players just kind of always fall into that scapegoat role year after year. The last player that makes the best team every year, but they're always the 12th or 13th forward. They're always the bench player. And it just kind of becomes a part of their identity. And it's just easy for players to keep using, or coaches to keep using that player as the scapegoat.
Yeah. Or just the like, in conditioning, for example, like it's usually the same people who are in the back.
Yeah.
And the coaches sometimes use that as like that person needs to make the time when you know that person might not make the time.
Yeah.
It just like immediately defeats that person. And then they're like, the team's going to be mad at me because I'm not making the time. That's another example of like singling out, isolating specific players. Yeah. Oh, this is also yucky.
I know.
I feel comfortable around my coach. Only 50%.
Ugh.
That's not good.
That's not good.
Other players on the team feel comfortable around the coach. 70%. So that's interesting how like how you perceive other players is like significantly different than how you perceive yourself.
But it's not even that far off.
No. I've had 7 personal meetings with my coach over the past 3 years and have left every single meeting feeling discouraged, on the verge of tears, prepared to leave the sport. That is like what makes my stomach turn. Like a coach or anybody making you feel like you don't want to play your sport anymore.
Yeah.
That's devastating.
We work with a lot of athletes who have come to us in a time of need where a coach has essentially made them feel that way, or the decision to retire from sport or to move on from sport is mostly because of feeling sick and tired of having negative experiences with coaches year after year. And yeah, it's one of my least favorite things because as a player, it just feels really devastating when the decision to stop playing is not because of you, because you're ready to move on, or your body gave it all it had, but because it's so toxic that the coaches that you're stuck with, that if you go back and play one more year, that you're stuck with, you're like, I can't do that again. Oh God, yeah, that just makes me want to punch.
In there. The biggest takeaways, though, honestly, like every time we talk about this, all of the conclusions are relatively similar, and that there's just not enough research or development of programs or anything that are a fix per se.
Yeah.
But the need for that, the bringing awareness to it. So really the things to take away and to know are, if you're a coach, knowing about this stuff. Because again, a lot of the time people are not doing this intentionally. It's that intent versus impact like we talked about.
Yeah.
Or they're not doing it to be malicious. But knowing about this stuff, I bet you would even lower some of these percentages that we went through. But also telling people about it as a player, telling your parents, telling other coaches, telling other teammates, parents coming together, teammates coming together to tell like the presidents of the club or whatever the organization is like. Those are pretty much what you can do at this point.
Yeah. We had an issue with like a small sport in Alberta where, you had no options for who was going to be coaching your kid. And so there's coercion where as the parent, you feel stuck because like your kid really wants to continue playing the sport, but that they're going to be trapped with like this really abusive coach. And so there are a lot of sporting organizations that also use coercion because it's like, well, we're the only big dog in town, so you're going to have to deal with this no matter what. So there's no motivation for them to change. Well, what if every other parent, every athlete just said, later? That's the kind of action that it takes sometimes. If there's no one there to put money in their pocket, I mean, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
There's always a way. There is always a way, but sport's really good at making parents and athletes feel like there's one way. And it's just not true.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess like one of the last quotes I wanted to read to end it off was like, no one believes the athlete's story, and the isolation and invalidation continue until the athlete quits, and rarely is there a good outcome.
Yeah.
So that quote just kind of like hits home and like really like strengthens what we just said about speaking out, telling people, telling your parents, getting your teammates to come together, fighting for a safe environment.
Yeah. And again, when you look at the resources for coaching staff, like, well, I'll talk about just the Canadian landscape. So you look at Respect in Sport, which is a mandatory kind of online click through the slide workshop that coaches have to take. There's no accountability for it, right? It's just you have to watch the videos, click through the slides, answer like grade 1 level questions to be like, were you paying attention to this? And then you get your certification. You're good. Woohoo!
Yeah, same with Safe Sport. Same exact deal. Yeah.
And when you look at the kinds of training that coaches get to get certified as coaches, 90% of them are systems based, coaching knowledge about sport specific, position specific. There is no, or very little. I know there's a couple, but the people that are even teaching those, I question. There is very little certification that coaches are expected to acquire that actually teaches coaches how to improve like communication, how to have really successful one-on-ones, how to manage personalities, stress, and mental health of players and athletes. And that is exactly what MindBuffs does. That's the kind of training and education that we provide. And yeah, it definitely is our goal one day that our content becomes certified so that players can receive credits that help them be able to move on in sport. Because the things that we are teaching impact athletes' performance more than do you know how to run a practice. Because you can just watch YouTube for 30 minutes before practice and come up with a practice plan. You can't watch 30 minutes of how to communicate and just know what to do. Like you need to do real work and you need to be trained by experts to know how to manage those very highly emotional, highly sensitive, complex spaces. So if you're a coach or if you know of an organization that desperately needs something and someone like us, this is what I'll just speak for myself, I'm most passionate about, is actually helping coaches be supported and given the tools that they need, because it can feel like a thankless job, a very isolating job, and an unsupported one. So yeah, I see you, coaches. I hear you. It's a really hard gig. So again, we weren't here to just slam on you and say that all coaches suck, but you need support. You can't do this alone. Stop thinking that you can.
Yeah, it's all about just knowing what all of this stuff is so that you can also be a catalyst for change. That's just what we're after.
Yeah. Whew.
Whew. So go on.
Fantastic. Well, again, please comment on this content. Please ask us questions. I know we've gotten emails and messages before. We loved that. Keep sending that in. Please like and subscribe so that we can continue to expand the amount of people and coaches and leaders that have access to these kinds of conversations. And just simply tell a friend. Give it to a coach you think might need to listen to something like this. And really looking forward to continuing our Power and Control Wheel series that we're doing. And we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.